I'm observing this many times that corporate strategy isn't designed in a way that it's meaningful for people who are working in such kind of processes. So for them, if you change the strategy, basically the day-to-day doesn't change, which is potentially a problem. So that's the one thing, it's not understandable. The other thing is it potentially never reaches them. They haven't been engaged or it hasn't been communicated to them. And then the question of purpose is not answered. So they think, okay, I'm doing this operational process, but whether I calibrate this process a bit more to the left or a bit more to the right to contribute to the overall strategy sometimes isn't there as a question. So why are we actually doing this process the way we are doing it, or how should we do it? This question isn't being discussed.
Welcome to the New Process Podcast. Learn all the tools, methods, and best practices combined with people, emotions, and a human-centric mindset to rethink your process and push it to the next level. And here is your host, Mirko Kloppenberg.
Yeah, welcome to episode 20 of the New Process Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Lars Linnekogel about strategy, and we are applying his experience to processes to find out how to develop process strategy together. Lars is managing director of TTE Strategy. TTE Strategy is a premium consulting boutique for strategy and transformation, always following the motto, creating results together, with a strong focus on human aspects of transformation. So that perfectly fits to the new process approach. He founded the company in 2015, and TTE Strategy quickly grew to a consulting boutique with more than 25 consultants, offices in Germany, Hamburg and Munich, and one office in Zug, Switzerland. Also, the company is still quite young. They have already won several awards as a top strategy consultancy. Prior to founding TTE Strategy, Lars worked as project leader and consultant for the Boston Consulting Group. And before that, Lars also worked in various positions at Lufthansa Group. But we both were unsure whether we have already met in person during that time or not. So I'm not sure. So in this episode, you'll learn about the different types of strategies, how to develop a strategy in general, and more specific, how to develop a process strategy. And Lars will share the important elements to not only develop, but also to successfully implement a strategy, which is applicable for a process strategy and for all kinds of strategies as well. Then in the recap, I'm trying to push it even further, and I'm going to summarize my learnings from a new process perspective just for you. So get ready for a real load of insights and enjoy the interview with Lars.
And now, let's start to rethink processes.
Lars, welcome to the New Process Podcast. I'm super excited to have you here in this interview today because I'm really interested to learn more about how to develop a process strategy, or from you to learn how to develop a strategy and then transfer that on processes. So super cool. Welcome, Lars.
Mirko, thanks a lot for the invite. I'm also very excited to be talking with you today.
Yeah, perfect. Then let's dive right into the check-in and the first check-in question. And I already mentioned that in the introduction. You, at one time in your life, have also been an airline employee. So you know this question very well, I guess. So what do you prefer in an aircraft, aisle or window seat?
That's a great question. So when I think about it, I cannot give you a straight answer. It totally depends on the situation. So sometimes I prefer the window seat, but only if the middle seat isn't taken. I feel it's a bit too tight sometimes, so to say, if you're squeezed into the window and then someone's next to you. The big advantage with the window seat actually is that when you need to work, the people opposite the aisle behind you cannot see what you're doing on your screen. Even if you have a protective screen, it's better. But if the middle seat is taken, then my preference is the aisle. It feels a bit more spacious, so to say then.
Yeah, that's super cool. I flew to Stuttgart. When was it? Last week on Thursday. And I also choose the window seat because I wanted to work a little bit. And usually I select the seat on the right-hand side of the aircraft because then I can move my right arm a little bit more. If someone is sitting in the middle of the seats, it's always hard if you are sitting on the left-hand side
So the working seat is the right window seat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, very good. Yes. Except if you're a left-hander, then it's the left.
Yeah, okay, then it's the other way around.
Yeah,
Maybe we can execute a study on that and try to find out the preferences there. Okay, but let's continue with the check-in here. And what is your favorite airport?
Yeah, you will be surprised now. It's Hamburg Airport.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's only for one key reason, because when I land at Hamburg Airport, it will not take me much time until I'm at home and can see my family, and not be in a hotel room somewhere else. We can talk about processes, of course, a bit later, and then we can talk about airport processes as well. And Hamburg Airport will probably not stand out, but for the reason of coming home, it is.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. That's very good. Cool. And you already mentioned processes. So what was the best process you have ever experienced?
Yeah. So the best process I've ever experienced was a flight connection process at Joburg Airport in South Africa.
Nice.
And what I experienced there, I was on an incoming flight on South African and connecting to the Swiss flight to Zurich, and basically impossible to make it, but it was still realized, I think, with a bit of some illegal tactics by the airport staff. So that's why I will not go into the details there, but they made it happen. If I'm looking at today a bit, what I really, really like is solutions like Shopify, for example. Yeah, when you buy something somewhere online, even if you haven't, so to say, been a customer of that online shop, but you can just register with your mobile phone or so, and the checkout is really smooth. I think that's just fantastic. It makes online shopping so much easier. A really big fan of that.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Cool. Okay. Perfect. So thanks for checking in. Then let's board our flight. And how would you describe your relationship to processes?
Yeah, so coming back to my favorite Hamburg Airport, okay. I think my personal relationship to processes is that I'm really allergic to bad processes. And I could now talk, for example, about the Hamburg Airport security processes. Let's leave it at that. I think my overall sentiment around processes is that a bad process can leave behind a really bad impression of a company or an organization, or when it's customer facing. A good process is what you expect. And an excellent process, that's something in my view that really makes it different. And that's what you need. The question, of course, then is, what does excellent mean? And it really depends on the purpose. What do you want to achieve with that process, for example? So when we think about the theme of aviation that we have been discussing here today already, you could think about the processes that airlines have in place when it comes to compensating passengers for delays as per EU regulation. Yeah. And in the perspective of the passenger, the process that airlines have in place for such kind of compensation is definitely not excellent. In their perspective, it's probably excellent, right? Because they don't want to pay out the compensation. So passengers may find it poor, but then you really have to ask yourself, when you set up such a process, are you really going to lose a customer based on a poor process here? And the answer that I believe in this case is probably not. And that's why for them the process works. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, always different perspectives on the process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool. Maybe a strategy as well. Yeah. Okay. So I already introduced TTE in the introduction, but what is the core philosophy of your strategy and transformation consulting approach?
Yeah. So basically, the core philosophy that we bring to the table is that we always co-create strategy and transformation work. So we take the people who will be responsible to implement a strategy onto the table from day one. Yeah, it's a true co-creation. We call this working with the team of the future. And what we promise, so to say, is that when you have the team of the future around the strategy table from day one, you will not have this gap between concept and reality later on, because they will need to drive it through. That's our promise, and it works well.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Sounds a little bit like a new work approach to integrate the people which are affected by whatever is coming up. So very good. I can understand that approach, and I really love this one. And looking back, what was your favorite strategy project you have been working on?
Well, the favorite strategy project that I've worked on was actually an airline project where we, so to say, looked at the market that airline was operating in, and were thinking through how could the airline differentiate further, and which then led to the foundation, so to say, of an additional airline which is operating successfully today.
Wow. So it was really implemented, yeah? So
it was really implemented, yeah, for once. So that's actually true, yeah.
Yeah, because that's often the thing when you're talking about strategies. Is this in the end then implemented or not? So that's really a success if it is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool. So in general, yeah, I would always say that process follows strategy, but in a broader sense, looking also onto what I'm more or less teaching within the new process world, I would say that first you define the purpose of an organization, and then based on the purpose, you develop a strategy to make this purpose come reality. And then to implement this strategy, I would always look for the best processes, if that's something which has to be implemented process-wise. And then based on the process design, I would always recommend to go for finding the best organizational structure, and then finding the best people to execute these processes. Do you agree to this general approach? So from purpose to changing the reality, or what is your picture on that?
I absolutely agree. I mean, overall, when you think about strategy, you always need to ask yourself, okay, where do we want to go? What do we want to achieve? Why does an organization exist, let's say? And based on that, you then need to sort of say cascade it down and say, how are we going to get there? Create a plan for that. And we can talk about it a bit more in some situations from the context of the company or the market. The plan has to be very adaptive, because there's a lot of uncertainty around it. But let's say overall you have a plan, and to realize that plan, you then need to think through what you need for that. And that's then your organization, the processes, the people, technology as well, funding, governance, stuff like that as well plays into this. But makes total sense. I would say it doesn't make any sense to think about a process as a standalone without thinking what should it actually deliver in the context of the broader organizational or company objectives.
Yeah, okay. You already mentioned other aspects like funding. So what different types of strategies would you differentiate between?
Yeah, I think there are really thousands of different types of strategy, because in my view, a strategy is, so to say, just a plan to get to somewhere. Yeah, okay. So you think about something that you want to achieve, yeah, and then the strategy is your approach on how to get there. And what you basically need in the beginning, or what usually triggers a strategic discussion, is a trigger, yeah, and a trigger could be that a competitor is shifting to something happens in your market. There's a new technology, or that, so to say, the company management needs to have a new plan for the next couple of years or so to move to a certain direction and to enable growth, right? And it could be a lot of different triggers. You could have growth strategies. You could have a strategy how to get funding, for example. It's a lot of different things, and so there is no that single answer that you say a strategy needs to look like this. I think a strategy needs to help guide teams, an organization, the management, the leadership, to move from A to B. Yeah, and then it depends a lot on the context where the company or the organization operates. Yeah, if A to B is pretty clear, then it's kind of easy. If A to B is not so clear, and a lot of disturbance or noise or headwinds could occur during this journey, yeah, then you need to, so to say, be a bit more flexible around it and potentially partner up and so on. Yeah, but in overall, it would be hard for me to say you have three different types of strategy or so. I think it's the approach on how to get from A to B.
Okay. So in general, how do you proceed to develop this kind of strategy?
Mm-hmm. So if you look at the broader company strategy, for example, we are working through this in 4 to 5 steps. Initially, you get an understanding of the company, and the environment that the company operates in, and then we derive the approach for the strategy. Yeah? So as I mentioned already, you could follow something firm, where you say, hey, investment cycles are very clear in this industry. There's not a lot of disruption. It's kind of stable. But you could also operate in an environment where there's a lot of unclarity on how this environment will move forward. Yeah, it could be, for example, the automobile industry, where you don't know what platforms will, so to say, push through, what partnerships or ecosystems will emerge, how are, so to say, big tech players playing into this environment. And there, your strategy needs to be much more adaptive. And then you basically, when you know, okay, I'm following a very firm and clear and planned approach versus something that's very adaptive, then you basically build hypothesis of a potential direction. That's in the next big step. And these hypotheses can emerge from what you observe in the market, ideas the company has themselves, or sort of say things where you link aspects of such kind up. And once you have these hypotheses, you are really going, so to say, to validate these. So you need to try to understand, are my hypotheses or my ideas for the future where the company could move towards, are they true, or could they be potentially true? And should we pursue those further? And so to say, then when you have your core hypothesis validated, then you basically have a strategic direction that you want to pursue. Once you have that strategic direction, let's say the third big step is then, when we work on strategy, is to become a bit creative, and we basically try to shape a picture of the future. So we're going to maybe do it ourselves together with our clients, or we bring an artist in, and we say, let's draw a picture of the company in 5 years or in 10 years. Who are we going to be at that point in time? And we basically describe the future. And then we come to step number 4, where we then now have a clear understanding of what's our point B, where do we want to get to, and then we cascade down what do we actually need to do to get there. So in this picture, you then have your company purpose, and the vision, and so to say strategic outlook at the top. You then have core elements of your strategy, and it could be something like certain growth elements. It could be elements around how to interact with customers. Who will your customers be? What will your revenue channels be? And so on, for example. And then you have enablers, how we call them. And that's what you mentioned before already, around what kind of organization do I need? What kind of people are required? Technology, processes, and other element. And of course, the aspect of sustainability will be a core element as well nowadays as part of the strategic picture. And then the last step is then getting this activated, where we then say, okay, how are we now going to get this started? What are the immediate priorities that we need to pursue right now? Who is going to do it? With what kind of resourcing, and what's happening later? And a very important step in this is when you then think about your, let's say, strategy project portfolio, that this is well balanced. So you always need to have elements in your strategy project portfolio that or for which you are kind of certain that you can deliver on these, and that they will bring a return in the short term for you, or take you to the next step in the short term. And then you have some elements that are a bit more out the horizon, mid to long term benefits, or so to say strategic moves, where there's more uncertainty, where more work is required. So you really need to look at that you're not only in this long-term space, where you are, so to say, creating theoretical castles today, that will never materialize or only with a lot of uncertainty. And also that you don't only focus on things that are very, very near term. You may lose then the strategic outlook in the future and lose against competitors. And then basically you set it up. And depending on the company size, the complexity of the strategy, you're running this with an activist PMO, for example, and drive the strategy forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So with regards to the picture of the future, is that really a painted picture? Yeah, as you said, something.
It could be a painted picture, right? So we have done that, for example, and it works really well. You are in that context even forbidden in some scenarios to write on the picture. Yeah. So it's really about activating a bit the imagination, but also to be able to be crisp. Complexity comes with language, and with a lot of bullet points on PowerPoint slides and so on. But if you want to be clear on where the company needs to be in a couple of years, and you're forced to put that onto a painted picture, you cannot bring every detailed point. So you really have to focus on the big buckets, and that's what it can do, right? The other thing that you can do, for example, is you can say, okay, I'm holding a speech. There's let's say an employee meeting or a shareholder meeting in 10 years. And you can say, hey, let's write that speech together. And that's, by the way, also a good tool. If you write your speech or your story of the future, you can cascade that down. So what's the story that the CEO or the C-suite team, what they write? And then you could say, hey, okay, the COO now takes this story, and when it becomes to activation, so that this becomes purposeful and connected to the overall strategy, he or she could then take this to the operations team, and let's say their operations director below the COO, they could write their story or their speech towards their team in 10 years. Mm-hmm. In the language that matters to them and with elements that is relevant to that team. And so that's also a very creative approach to cascading this down. You just need to manage this process well, so that you don't have, so to say, many different arms that are not connected to each other. So that the core team needs to be clear on where they want to drive the journey. And I think one element that we observe lately, and that we're also suggesting to our clients, is in this exercise to look at it from a risk perspective. I mean, the last couple of years have been highly disruptive, to the pandemic, but also to the overall economic situation today, war situations in the world. What are the strategic risks that your company faces? Operational as well, but more so the strategic risks that your company faces. And what would it take to become resilient? And offer resilience to your customers as well. And if you are in a context with a lot of risk and requirements for resilience, your competitors will be so as well. And if you then think about what can I do, so to say, to reduce my risks and create some strengths out of this, and if you incorporate those pieces into your strategy, if you're a logistics company, for example, you have a big problem through disrupted supply chains. And if you are turning this around and you're saying, hey, our vision is that I'm a company that ensures resilience in let's say, global supply chains. What does it now take to make that happen? So you can also totally inverse this to get to this future picture right now. And I think it's a good approach to come up with differentiators that could make you unique in your market field.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Cool. And then as soon as we have this picture of the future, the strategy, is there some kind of a magical machine where you put the strategy into and then some rocket science happens and at the end the reality is changed into the perfect new future? Or how would you recommend to get from the strategy to change the reality?
This is a topic that is basically at the core of what we do at TTE Strategy. Okay. So our idea and belief is that a strategy is basically only a daydream if you are not able to realize it, or you maybe want to throw some clouds at someone. Yeah, that's why you create a strategy to somehow create some distraction. But if you are really interested in creating a strategy that gets implemented, that's not an easy task. And you can look at different sources. All the big consultancies are writing about this, that basically 70% of strategies that you want to implement fail in the context of, never happens like that, will be more expensive, takes much longer, and so on, right? So our core belief is that the main issue with failed strategy is that the people who need to implement them and need to live them, so to say, that they are not behind the core ideas of the strategy, that they are written somewhere on paper and are theoretically well thought through, but are not connected to the organization, that the people who need to bring them to life say, hey, these haven't been invented here, I'm not intrinsically motivated, it's not my idea, it's not fulfilling me, it's not my identity behind this, so to say. So what we believe in is that those colleagues in an organization who will be responsible later on to implement a strategy, that they, so to say, need to be part of it from day one. And we call this fair process approach. That doesn't mean that everybody now needs to think through the strategy, but that you need to be clear to those people who you will need later on to drive it, how they can contribute and how they can be heard. So there's a big element of engagement requirements in the beginning, and that starts with that you explain why we are actually looking at this right now. So what is the trigger behind this the strategy exercise? Is this, we come back to process, is this something that we are doing every year in March or April? I mean, that feels a bit outdated to me. It's much more powerful if you say, we are looking at this because we are observing this and this, or we are facing this challenge, or we are seeing that this and this happens, for example, right? So, and then you think about, okay, I want to answer a strategic question. I have a trigger. Trigger could be, I don't know, pandemic or so. And the strategic question should be, how should we now move forward in this difficult market environment? And then you think about, who do I need for that? You take these people, so to say, into the process. Some of them will be at the core of the process. They will be continuously engaged and discuss and evaluate and shape ideas. Others will be asked to provide input. And then a key element, so to say, where it often breaks apart is that once you conclude that a certain direction makes sense based on the input from the people, that these people never hear back from the team that drives the strategy on why this direction has been chosen versus maybe other proposals that have been given from the organization to move forward. And that's really critical. So what that can then imply is that people in the organization will think, okay, you are asking us, but you're not really caring what we are doing, or you anyhow think you know everything is better that you do, because you have this fixed idea already. So in our view, a very important step, and your question was how to make strategy implementation successful, is to engage with the right people who will need to make it happen later on, and to take them seriously as part of the process. And I mentioned the word fair process. It's about procedural fairness. It's not about democracy or anything like this. It's about the perception of the stakeholders who are relevant to make the strategy happen at the end of the day, that they can contribute with their perspective, with their ideas, and that they get clear feedback on why a certain path forward has been chosen. And then lastly, once the path forward has been chosen, that this is also the path forward that will be executed until you have better knowledge that the path forward isn't the right one anymore. Yeah. So if the market shifts totally and you are still following the strategy that you have decided a year or 2 years ago, but everything changes around you, that's also a big reason why strategies fail. Yeah. That you're not getting it implemented because the context has changed. So in short, if you take the people along who need to implement, in the conceptual phase in the beginning, your chances are much higher. And I actually also believe that when you look at it maybe in 2 phases, you have your strategy development concept phase A, and the strategy implementation phase B. Yeah, and A plus B, how long does this take? Okay, so when you are in a setting where you basically focus on a quick conceptualization of your strategy, and in some context that may be right, your phase A will be kind of fast, but phase B will be much longer, because then change management starts. Yeah, you need to now onboard the people. In our world, on our thinking, phase A is a bit longer, because you're engaging with the people already in that phase. But then phase B will be shorter, as you don't have to re-explain everything from the start. The buy-in is already there. Yeah? So I think that's a core difference, and often that's difficult, right? Because you have, when you are in the C-suite, you feel the urgency to come up with solutions quickly. Yeah, you want to have clarity for yourself. Yeah, many people have difficulty coping with the unclear situation. Yeah, they want to have a quick solution to the strategy, and I believe in psychology it's called negative capability. Yeah, to accept and to hold the situation that you're not quite clear yet in which direction it could go. And of course, you have your own ideas and hypotheses, and you may have fallen in love with these as well already. Yeah, so it's a big leadership task, so to say, to follow this approach of identifying the people and then, so to say, engaging them properly and playing it back to them as well. It takes a lot of time, plus also leadership skills to make that happen. But where I have seen this, when this works really well, it unleashes a lot of power towards the implementation, because people are really excited about that.
Yeah, I fully agree, and that fits to my personal experiences, and that's also what I'm trying to push forward with the new process approach, where you really involve the people right from the beginning. It may take a little bit longer until you get to implementation, but you have the people on board, then they know what is coming up, they had the chance to bring in their ideas, and they are way more involved when comparing that just to doing something in the ivory tower without integrating the people, and then wondering, why does the implementation fail? Yeah. So I fully agree. That's super interesting. So let's apply these ideas more to processes. So let's zoom a little bit more into the world of the process. I'm working a lot with people who are accountable for a process design specifically. And then often in the end also for the execution. But in these cases, the overall organizational strategy is already given. Yeah. So like we want to go into other countries, like moving from Germany to another country could be part of the strategy, or digitalization ideas could be part of the organizational strategy, and so on. And then it's always the question from a process perspective, how do I continue? So I know that I have to do something with my process to fulfill the organizational strategy. So what would you recommend to a process owner on how to develop a specific process strategy based on a given organizational strategy?
Yeah, I think it's great that you put it into that kind of context, because if the organizational or company strategy is clear to the process owner, that's a very good starting point. Yeah. So should it not be clear?
Yeah, often it's not.
Then I think the process owner has a big task. Yeah, in clarifying how the process or what the company strategy is, or finding it out for him or herself, if not clear. And then sort of say the big question is, how does this process contribute to the achievement of the strategy? What's the purpose of this process? So you could now say, hey, I'm potentially in a company where where the strategy is focused on cost leadership in the market. Then of course, your underlying target is to design every process as cost efficient as you can. You could also be in a situation where your company strategy is that the company wants to differentiate through quality leadership in the market. And there I could imagine, for example, that if you're owning a process that involves the customer facing aspects, for example, complaint management as well, also, that you are going to design the process very differently than a company that says in every aspect we will be the leanest and cheapest, so to say, possible. So you will focus much more on full customer satisfaction to meet this quality ambition. So I think the big question in the beginning, when you now translate the company strategy to process strategy, is what is the purpose of this process? How can this process, or should this process, contribute to the achievement of the company strategy? And I would then say that the process owner needs to bring together the team of the future for this process as well. Who are the key players along the process who can contribute that this process does what it should with regards to the company strategy? So these people should be coming together. In my view, they can then apply the same logic that I have described earlier on for a company strategy for their process. So what are the hypotheses that they can generate? What this process should do and how it could potentially look like? What could it contribute? Then, so to say, validate this. Have we made the right assumptions for in the context of the corporate strategy? Do we actually need to deliver these things? Are we missing any things out? And you depending on which process you're looking at, the process also always has a starting point and an end point with a lot of, so to say, side arms. But there are always customers to the process as well. What do these customers need? And then what are the conditions in which this needs to be, so to say, delivered to the people or to the process customers. And so when you have then clarity around how they contribute to the company strategy, what does the customer want, you get different perspectives. Then you could also create this picture of the future, the ideal process, if you like. What's my picture of how this should work? How do I imagine this going forward? And then the team can, so to say, design the process, or see either it's a complete redesign, you go potentially even zero based. You say, okay, come on, our process is not fit for purpose. Let's put it to the side. If we were doing a startup scenario here now, how we would we create this process from scratch? Or you do adjustments to the existing process, depending on what's more promising. And then this team of the future for the process thinks this through together. You get full buy-in when it comes to making the changes to the process. Very often today you're also bringing in, of course, departments that will support you, or teams that will support you. IT very often, more and more also sustainability, especially when it comes to, commercial processes, for example, that you need to, so to say, bring them in to get the right understanding of what you could also promise your customers. And then you design it and then you create a path to make it happen. And I think a process owner to get this this cross-functional team, in many cases, the process is not just focused on one function in an organization, but across functions, then creates a community around that, and an easy way to do that, for example, is if you create Teams channels, for example, where you have all your key company processes. It could be procure to pay, hire to retire in HR, or lead to order, also on the sales side, or the order to delivery for manufacturing and logistics and all those or supply chain. If you create communities where people can then interact and talk, hey, how can we make this better? Then you sort of say you get this cross-functional feeling around how to make this a great process that actually delivers on our strategy. And I would also recommend process owners to regularly reflect within their team, but also, for example, with strategy people in the organization. How can we contribute? Are we contributing sufficiently? What's your perspective? And they should be involved, ideally as well, as part of the corporate strategy process. The big process owners. What can we do? What can we so to say build as a company to actually achieve our overall strategy?
Cool. That's super interesting. I was just thinking of a customer I was visiting a few weeks ago where somehow the processes were disconnected from the overall organizational strategy. And it was not clear, actually, what is our strategy and how does this influence our processes? So as you already said, first step would be to clarify the implications of the overall strategy onto the processes, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm observing this many times as well. So that the corporate strategy isn't designed in a way that it's meaningful for people who are working in such kind of processes. So for them, if you change the strategy, basically the day-to-day doesn't change, which is potentially a problem. So that's the one thing, it's not understandable. The other thing is potentially never reaches them. They haven't been engaged or it hasn't been communicated to them. And then the question of purpose is not answered. So they think, and rightly so, they think, okay, I'm doing this operational process, but whether I calibrate this process a bit more to the left or a bit more to the right to contribute to the overall strategy sometimes isn't there as a question. So why are we actually doing this process the way we are doing it, or how should we do it? This question isn't being discussed. And that leads to another point, that often you don't have anyone in the organization who grasps that this is a required discussion. When you have functional leaders, they think, okay, how does finance need to contribute? How does HR need to contribute? But not from a process perspective. So in organizations where you have global process owners, and you're thinking more in an agile way with chapters and so on. This happens a bit more. That you say, okay, how does this process chapter need to contribute to the overall strategy? But organizations that are functionally set up, they don't think that way too much, but could easily, right? So who is the main owner of a process? So if I say procure to pay, procurement and finance somehow need to sit together. How can we make that part of the delivery to the overall strategy more than today? For example, and ask those questions.
Yeah, so true. So it definitely makes sense to get into a more process-oriented perspective and then connect that to the overall strategy. Yeah, cool. So what would you say, what are the key points in developing a strategy so it can be successfully brought to life in the end?
Yeah, I think this is what we discussed already, right? So 70% of strategies fail. And I think really the key ingredient or the secret sauce is this culture of, let's call it fairness or engagement. I need to bring the people who need to make it happen on board early on. I need to explain why are we answering this question right now? Why is it relevant now? Then I need to define what is, so to say, my option space when it comes to ideas. Yeah, am I going crazy? Am I just playing on a certain field? So when you think about a street, yeah, or an autobahn, yeah, can I use all lanes in my thinking? Yeah, but I cannot, so to say, go off track, if you like, right? So those are the elements, and then really involving the people and engaging the people, and consider strategy not as a paper exercise, but as a transformation exercise from day one. Yeah, so I always say strategy is strategy and transformation. Yeah, otherwise, again, it's a daydream or something useless or something just to distract someone. Yeah, but I would say that companies or leaders should only create strategies that they also want to pursue. Again, the strategy is nothing else than a plan to get from A to B. And some strategies are very clear. Okay, we need to do these 5 things, then we are there. And some strategies are around, okay, let's take these first steps and then let's see whether we need to turn left or whether we need to turn right, because it's so uncertain, the environment that we have. And I think to be clear also in which kind of space you are also helps.
Yeah. Okay. And let's push this even further with regards to new process and rethinking processes. Is there anything, or what would be your top recommendation to rethink processes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think the things that I would recommend is to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the process? Yeah, to start there. Why do we need this process? What does it need to deliver? How does it contribute to strategy? Based on this, who is your team of the future for this process? Yeah, who needs to be part of the design of the execution? And then third, based on these 2 things, the purpose of the process and the team of the future, what is the joint vision for the process from this team? Yeah, I think these are 3 key ingredients that make a difference, and then you can later on get to the technicalities of process design and what do we need and so on. But there's also another element that I find really important, and it's that of flexibility. So to give you an idea what I mean, if I'm on a flight, for example, and I'm making a complaint about something that went wrong. And the process could be that I'm making the complaint to the flight attendant, and the flight attendant then tells me that I need to go to the website and fill a complaint form. And that could be the standard process. Yeah, you can say, okay, makes sense. It's an okay process. But what I mean by flexibility is that when the flight attendant realizes, for example, that my complaint is valid, and that it's also, let's say, problematic, from a customer perspective, and that I have a point, then the flight attendant could decide to answer to me right there on the flight and say, we get your point. You have a complaint. This is the way we are going to deal with this complaint. This is what we are going to do about it. And I have a solution right there. And for me, that flexibility element that you give in your process the right to certain players in the process to take the right decision in the moment, even if it deviates from the standard process, that can make a great process, because as a customer, for example, you then realize, this organization or this company that I have chosen really cares about a solution. Yeah. And so that's, I think, and that can be anywhere. Yeah. That could be anywhere in the process. Yeah. It could be a complicated order in an industrial goods company. It could be the way an HR team deals with a request or a difficult situation in terms of, I don't know, creating a shift Yeah, it could be anywhere. Where are the people that need a little bit of extra leg room, if we stick to the aviation language, yeah, in the process, so that they can make flexible decisions and choose, we are going to follow a different path here to make a difference for the process customer, if you like, right? And this again needs to be in the context of the company strategy. Yeah, there could be flexibility that is still in line with the cost leadership strategy. Yeah, I could see an opportunity to make the process shorter and cheaper. Yeah, and to deviate from the standard process based on my short-term decisions, so I can still make it. Quality leadership, for example, I see my customer is complaining, or I can improve the situation, whatever. I'm making the call here and now, and the customer will say, "Wow, I will fly with them again. That was great." Yeah, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, perfect. And picking up the flight example, we already landed this episode. But before we leave the aircraft, is there anything we have missed with regards to process strategy you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, I think not really missed, but I would like to really emphasize that very often the process discussion is a very technical discussion. Yeah, when you think about, okay, what are the process steps? Who does what? Systems and so on. And people very often jump at that right away. They look at the process the way it is. How can we make it better? How we can make it leaner? What can we cut out? Or whatever the questions may be. But to take a step back, what is the purpose of this process? What is the bigger objective here? And how can we, with what we know today, and maybe with what others know, how can we, so to say, make it really sound? And I would like to encourage, so to say, the listeners of your podcast to say, when I'm thinking about the process, I'm adding these initial steps, and I'm taking some time to think these through before I'm going into process mapping or so to move there. And then it links to the strategic context as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm going to pick that up in the wrap up, and you as listeners can also find that in the new process lifecycle. So it's important step before you go into process design to really think through the process strategy there. And it was super interesting to get all these insights from you last year. And if our listeners would like to learn more about how to develop a process, or not a process strategy specific, or how to develop a strategy in general, and to learn more about you and what your company is doing, what would you recommend? Where should they go to?
It's very simple. You can follow us on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, or visit TTE-strategy.com.
Yeah, I'll put all the links into the show notes so it can be easily found afterwards. That's cool. And just looking a little bit into the future, I'm always asking my guests if they have a recommendation, which topic or method, tool, expert, whatever, which would you recommend to have a closer look onto to get new ideas to rethink processes?
Yeah, what I find really exciting, and I would definitely tune into an episode if you had a psychologist or a psychoanalyst as a guest, because what I'm observing, and maybe that's German culture as well, people really love to design process and think about processes, but then not follow them. Yeah. So I would like to really explore in the context of process. Yeah. And I mean, it depends on the industry. There are industries, come back to aviation, where that's not so the case, right? So where the process is a process, but in other cases, okay. Yeah. And what are, so to say, the deeper motives? Yeah. Around freedom, or what do I need to consider from a psychological perspective, when I want to make a process a reality, not only with the people who are, so to say, the future team, but also that they stick to what they have promised. I think that could be an interesting perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember one project I did in the past together with a psychologist. in the team. So she was part of the project team, and her perspective was so fascinating because she was always asking for the emotions and really triggering the people to open up and to tell more about what is behind what they are doing there right now. So yeah, that's cool. That's a good idea. And thanks for that recommendation. Okay, cool. So before we leave the aircraft, is there anything else we have missed or?
Yeah, I think maybe as a final point that just comes to my mind is that when people think about processes, that they keep in mind the process is a framework on how things should go. And in some cases, like we just said in aviation, for let's say aircraft engineer, for example, it's crucial that you follow this framework 100%. But in many cases, processes interact with humans, and they are not as predictable as machines. So when you design your processes and when you think about how to make a process successful, think about your process customer, if you like, and that they are not machines in most cases. So that makes it even more exciting.
That's good. Perfect. So then finally, how would you describe your flight experience with just 3 words?
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, cool. Me too. Lars, thank you very much for being my guest, and I'm already looking forward for other interactions with you in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Mirko. All the best.
Let's recap today's new process inspiration.
Yeah, cool. A strategy is just a plan on how to get from A to B. That's easy. Or, well, okay, maybe in reality it's not. But in the recap, I'm going to summarize my learnings from the interview and apply these to the context of processes. So specifically on how to develop a process strategy as my recommendation to a process owner, I would say. Yeah, so the first step, as I learned, is to bring together the team of the future. So in the context of processes, the person initiating that will be the process owner, supported by the process architect, and then inviting representatives of the different instances of the process execution, like the process managers, also a sample of line managers and employees. So this would be more or less also the core team of the process community, if you remember the interview with Mika Lennonen in episode 10. If not, that's always a good listen to. So the future team of the process is not only the team to develop the process strategy, but also the team who will do the transformation or the implementation of the process afterwards. And that's what Lars said. Make sure that the team of the future, like process owners, architects, process managers, and so on, will also be part of the implementation team afterwards. Then in the second step, I learned it's really important to understand on the one hand side the as is of the process and to clarify the strategy of the organization itself. So there he recommends to team up with the corporate strategy team or the organizational strategy team to clarify the implications and the purpose of the process. So how does this process contribute to the overall strategy and, even more important, to the overall purpose? And I love talking about purpose, as you know. So this then would be the definition of point A in your journey on how to get from A to B. So in the second step, make sure to understand where you are right now and identify the implications of the organizational or the overall strategy on your specific process. Then in the next step, together with the team, create hypotheses of the potential development of the process and validate them so that you have ideas into which directions the process could be developed to contribute to the overall strategy and to the purpose as well. So not only the purpose of the organization, but also the purpose of the process. Then in step 4, as soon as we have the ideas of where we can go and have validated these hypotheses, it's time to develop a picture of the future process. So there I'm not talking about the process design, like having all the activities, roles, swim lanes, and so on. I'm really talking about a picture, a painted picture of how the process looks like in 5 to 10 years. So if that's possible for a process, maybe it's more realistic to talk about 5 years, but paint a picture. And I would also try to link this picture with the process purpose, which has already been developed in the phase upfront to the development of the process strategy. I'll try to explain how to do this in the toolbox on newprocesslab.com in the future. So parts of the ideas are already published there, but for sure the insights from today's interview are still missing, and that's on my task list for the upcoming weeks. So in addition to a painted picture, Lars also gave the example of telling the story of the process. So imagine to be the process owner, and in 5 years, you are going to tell the story of the process to your process community. So in addition to having a painted picture, it's also an idea to write a text or hold a speech to explain how the process looks like in 5 to 10 years. Now we know where we are, we know A, and we just developed the target picture, the future process. That's point B. And now we need a plan on how to get from A to B. And this is step 5. So that's where we're going to develop the measures on how to get from A to B. And with regards to processes, I would say this could be changes of the process design on the one hand side. So maybe you're completely going to redesign a process or improve it or even innovate it. Or you think about the implementation. Maybe the process is already quite good, but the implementation is bad. So measures could be to implement the process, train the people in a better way, make sure that the prerequisites to execute the process are fulfilled, and so on. Third category would be to improve the process execution. And the fourth one would be to improve the steering of the process itself. So there are different dimensions for these types of measures that can be part of the plan to get from A to B. And then, as he recommended, we should also make sure to have a balanced portfolio of, on the one hand side, short-term benefits, so measures which can be implemented really quick to get early results, and then also, on the other side, mid and long-term strategic moves. And I love this term of strategic moves here as measures, which have a longer time frame for implementation. Yeah, and then final step is to start the implementation. So continue in the process lifecycle, design the process if it's necessary, and so on. And to also get ideas on how to bring that to life, I think it's nice to re-listen to episode 10, the interview with Mika Leinonen on process communities, because then you can use the power of your process community to get it rolling, to get the process implemented in a sustainable way. So, and to do the development and the implementation of a process strategy successfully, Lars mentioned 3 key factors, which I would like to recap here as well. So the first one is always to start with the why. So when starting the process, think about what triggers the strategy development. What is the strategic question we want to answer? And whom do I need to solve this? So with regards to the team of the future, I already said, basically for a process should be process owner, process architect, process managers, and representatives from the process execution, like line managers and experienced employees there. Then the second key factor he mentioned was that strategy development should be a fair process. And I really like the term fair process, which is not about democracy, as he said, but about setting up a transparent procedure which is then open for contributions and feedback. So make sure, and that perfectly fits to the new process approach, that you create transparency about what you are doing and invite the people to participate in the activities, ask them for feedback, and so on. So that's also part of the new process principles. And finally, the third key factor from Lars' interview is to take the time to engage with the people in the strategy phase. So it might take a little bit longer to involve all the people, get their feedback, their contributions. But in the end, this will pay out because it will enable a sustainable implementation afterwards. So yeah, these are his 3 key factors to take into account to successfully implement the strategy. And my plan now is to integrate all the learnings into the detailed process models of the new process lifecycle, which you can already find partly on newprocesslab.com. If you go there, newprocesslab.com/toolbox, or just click on toolbox in the navigation. There you can already find the new process lifecycle with all its phases, starting from defining the process purpose, developing a process strategy, designing the process, modeling the process, implementing, and finally steering process execution as the overall lifecycle there. So that's what we already have. And there are detailed process descriptions available for how to define a process purpose. I'm going to add the insights from today's episode there as well in the upcoming weeks, and feel free to take a look there. In the next episode, I'm going to share the results of my new process survey on your topics for the year 2023 with you. So that's going to be super interesting. And there will be also a number of contributions from BPM experts whose opinion I also value very much. So stay curious. There's something super interesting coming up. But for now, thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye and auf Wiedersehen.
You've been listening to the New Process Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode for more tools, methods, and best practices to rethink your process and push it to the next level. Thank you for listening.
Before you leave, as I already said in the recap, you will find more information in the toolbox on newprocesslab.com. But if you would like to be notified as soon as the process strategy insights are integrated into the toolbox, then please just subscribe to the New Process Update, which is my more or less weekly newsletter, by heading to newprocesslab.com/update. Have a great day. Thank you and bye-bye. Stop. One more thing before you leave. I have to share a personal story with you. So when I left Lufthansa, I told my team that they could use one thing as an indicator if I fail with newprocesslab.com and come back. So if they get a new process calendar from me at the end of the year, they'll know I'm not coming back. And guess what? I just ordered the new process calendar for next year. So if you are interested in receiving one of these calendars, just go to newprocesslab.com/calendar and enter the drawing. So maybe you'll be in luck and receive one copy of the new process calendar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.